Hi. When we were talking about this post-industrial workflows, and it's a very personal story for me, because I have kids and we struggled with education, etc., etc. And when I was doing some research for tonight and reading some stuff, and at a certain moment I was, because I'm the first who speaks, so it's always a bit of setting the scene a little bit. And I was thinking, okay, why am I so reluctant in talking to teachers these days? Because it don't work, the system doesn't work. It's a lot of criticism against the current education. But why? Why is it? Why is it bad in my mind? Is it just bad, or where does it come from? So and in order to understand that, I dived a bit in the historical part of education as a start. And knowing why something is bad, it's always interesting to see where it came from. Why it is as it is today. So when we see that children everywhere, all over the world, are required by law to go to school, this is the basic idea, and that almost all schools are structured less or more in the same way. And as a society, we go towards a great deal of trouble and a lot of money to provide such schools to these kids. We seem to think that there's a logic reason why this happened, why we are staying, or why we are where we are today. So perhaps if we didn't force children to go to school, or if we operate schools completely differently, are we thinking that they would not grow up until they are competent adults? Is that the main question? Because in the beginning of time, hundreds of thousands of years ago, children just educated themselves through a sort of self-directed play, exploration, stuff like that. So if we so in relation to this biological history of our species, schools are quite recent, relatively recent, and before the schools existed, and before the advent of the agriculture, before etc., all these very important eras, we were hunter-gatherers, and then the strong drives in children to play and explore was the only need of our education, was to explore and to play, and there was no difference between work and play, which is different today. So and adults in these hunter-gatherer cultures, they allowed children in a certain way to have an almost unlimited freedom to play and explore, because they recognized that those activities, this exploration, this playfulness living, are a children's natural way of learning, and it's been researched by a lot of people who are looking at current or today's indigenous people, etc. So and with the rise of agriculture, and later the rise of the industrial revolution, the children became laborers, not players anymore. They became forced laborers. So play and expression were suppressed in a certain way, and this willfulness, this playfulness, which has been a virtue, became something that has been at a certain era been even beaten out of children. So as a result, those children, they had to work for long hours, and the work was not exciting. It was not exciting, and everything that has to do with skill in this intensiveness and knowledge intensiveness, that everything went away, and there was a big difference between that moment and the previous era, where it's essentially everything of life was to be understood as playfulness, as playing. So At a certain moment, farmers came up, and agriculture gradually changed that all. With agriculture, people produced more food, which allowed them to have more children, and it allowed people to live on permanent locations where the crops were planted, and so they didn't live this nomadic life anymore, and everything's changed. So, but the bad thing, or it's not a bad thing, but one of the things that changed was also the great cost in labor, because when you were a hunter-gatherer, you were harvesting everything that nature provides. A farmer has to plow, have to plant, you have to cultivate, you have to look for the flocks, etc., etc. So successful farming required a lot of people, and with larger families, children had to work in the fields as well, to help the younger siblings, or to work at home, or to take care for the siblings. So again, education just evaporated. So, and there was another thing that within this era of agriculture was the associated ownership of land, and the accumulation of property also created a specific status differences between people, and therefore also between people, between kids. So in the Middle Ages, when society became more hierarchical, you had the kings and the lords, and a lot of slaves and servants at the bottom, and most of people, also children, were servants, were serving somebody else. And I found a very stunning text from a noble huntsman who, and then I quote, who said about a boy, and I quote, please choose a boy servant as young as 7 or 8, and the boy should be beaten until he has a proper dread of failing to carry out his master's order. So this is, it's not even that long ago. So this was the Middle Ages. So education, again, only for certain people from certain standing, from certain status. So with the rise of industry, and there was a new sort of bourgeoisie class. So this feudalism, it went away. It subsided in a certain way. But the question is, did it improve the lives of these kids, of these children, this educational life? Not really. Everybody knows about the exploitation of children during the Industrial Revolution. Everybody remembers the pictures of kids working on factories. Kids died without anybody thinking about. So, and it's only in I think at the end of 19th century, 1888, 85, that the new legislation made rules about employing children under the age of 9. And it was still, and for today's point of view, still crazy. Children under the age of 9 were limited. Let me see, it was a workly week hours, 48 hours for 10 to 12-year-olds, and 96 hours for 13 to 17-year-old children. And 1883. And this was the limit. So it's called a legislation that forbade forbade the textile manufacturers to ask more from the children. So this was the limit. So this was considered as, okay, we're doing well for the kids. 96 hours, 13 to 17 years old. So at a certain time, industry progressed, and it became more automated. You have all the machinery, the technology that started up, and so the need for child labor disappeared in a certain way in some part of the world. So we all know today that there's still, India, Bangladesh is still a big problem. But the idea began to spread that childhood should be a time for learning, and schools for children were going to be developed as places of learning, whatever that meant at that time. But as a lot of these schools were started by these industrial people, employees in industry, they saw schooling actually to create better workers, and to make more interesting workers for their factories or for their industry. So the most important lessons, or the most important skills for a kid at that time was following directions, tolerance, punctuality, tolerance for long hours, and not even an ability to read and write. That was not that important at that time. Other crucial lessons were the successes of the fatherland, the achievements of the country, learning about the king, about all those items that the virtues of the founders of the country, and but also the necessity to defend the nation from evil forces. So that became education. So kids were educated as such at a certain time. So at that time, nobody was thinking about children leaving their own structure or their own knowledge. They all just learned exactly the lessons that they seemed to be that seemed to be very important by the adults. And I want to quote someone here, and I don't remember who it was, but it was the implanting of certain truths and the way of thinking into these children's minds. So the only known method of inculcation was forced repetition and testing from memory, and all repeating to make sure that they just like a parrot can say everything again without any way of thinking. So and at that time, school became work. And so it was not playful anymore. It became like work. So it's the same methods that have been used in the industry, in the field of industry, was transferred to the schools. So the repetition, the memorization of the lessons, despite the child's instinct to play freely, to explore the world, and there were no play days at all. There's a quote of a famous, I don't remember the name as well, and a very big, how do you say this, the captain of industry at that time, who said, as we have no play days, so neither do we allow any time to play for any day, for he that plays as a child will play as a man. So playing was disencouraged. So it's not good, don't play, just work. So remember, we are still talking about current education. So why we came to the current situation. In recent times, the methods of learning obviously became less harsh. We don't beat children anymore. That's the main idea. But a lot of these assumptions haven't changed at all. So this learning continues to be defined towards children as work. Work well, work good, have good point, have good grades, make sure you know everything that has to be known, and it's quite hard work. It's something that children must be forced to do in a certain way, and not something that naturally happens. The activities are not the children's self-chosen activities. And most of the lessons today in this traditional form of education, and remember the history, are determined by professional educators, not by children, of course. And yeah, it doesn't work very well. School today is the place where children learn a certain distinction that our forefathers, the hunter-gatherers, never used, and it is the distinction between work and play. And this is something that we have to challenge. And today schools are designed to solve yesterday's problems often. And so the traditional system of schooling, and certainly public schooling, is having a standardized curriculum and a certain obsession with ranking and grading. And this was specifically designed in this industrial age, and it's actually completely outdated and ineffective, despite the fact that everybody still uses it. So we really need to upgrade our educational system for the 21st century, it should be empowering self-directedness. It should be passion-driven, and it's a complete different approach towards the previous way. Maybe it's a little side note. When I was reading about this post-industrial concepts, Some researchers called the current situation post-industrial, and other researchers called the new ways of education post-industrial. So it was a bit confusing every now and then. So, but why do we have to change this? And I read something nice on the website of from Harvard that said educated individuals like Thomas Jefferson, Descartes, Shakespeare, Galileo, Plato, they were never given grades. It's a bit of a boutade, but we all know that grades define certain contours of our educational system. Even our society is structurally dependent on grading performances. And we all know that the best jobs go to students with the best grades at the best universities, and these universities in turn accept students from the best grades from the best high schools. So, and the problem, there's only one problem in this sentence, which is the word the best. The words the best. So why should we avoid these grades? Grades create a certain risk-averse behavior, and so these vain feelings are associated with certain grades, like when you have let's say 6 out of 10, or it's grade F, I think, in English, and you should be proud and happy if you're if you have an A, if you have 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10, and so and we notice that students are choosing the path towards the easiest way of getting the grade, and so the least resistance to have this easy A or this easy 10 out of 10 or 100%. And the question that we have to ask ourselves, creating these new educational systems, will this make them educated individuals this way, this easy, this risk-averse behavior? And there's a designer, Marcel Wanders, this Dutch designer, I think, and he said, doing a good project in school should be forbidden. Students have to make as many mistakes as possible and learn from it. So education should be in a certain way a safe haven for failure. Instead, emphasis should be placed on constant iterations and prototyping, rapid prototyping, allowing students to acquire the ability to cope with failure and bounce back. And this bouncing back is a part of this education as well. So another problem with the grades that I notice, and it's something that I notice with my own kids as well, is that they become an end goal. What do I have to know for the test? Oh, I have to know this, and this, and I don't have to know this, and this. So if I know this part of the syllabus, then I pass the test. And it's a very sad situation, and I noticed it with my kids as well. They have to know everything about the body except for the arms for some reason, and yeah, it's crazy. But it's a typical question that becomes increasingly popular, because the closer you come to a test date, because we have to test our children, the more popular the question comes. Oh, do you have to know this? Is this important? Is this part of the test? And it looks like quite an innocent question, but it's quite worrying. Because grades as such, because they are actually intended as an effective mean to learn, they have been transformed as such into a goal in itself, and they force students to memorize certain details necessary to pass the test, and they often force the same students to completely disregard comprehension of the subject at a whole. So and often, and I noticed that from my own experience being a student, I often left the tests and forgot everything, because I just memorized whatever we needed to know. There's a Google guy, one of the larger bonos on Google, who said once, grades are worthless as a criteria for hiring, as they do not predict anything. Which was quite interesting. So another problem with grades is they are or they seem to be a very inadequate form of feedback. I think we might agree that receiving feedback is quite essential in education. It allows us to improve in a certain way. and there shouldn't be a limit in qualitative learning. Learning never stops. We are pupils for the rest of our lives, and a grade at a certain point seems to signal the end of a learning process. And there's also something that has to be taken into account, is that that grades also affects the relation between teacher and students. It's something that when I was talking to the parents during the Buckminster preparation, it was something that came up often. People seem to differently talk to a person with A grades than they talk to the people with C grades, and this is very limitative. When you get personal feedback, and it can be the difference between, okay, you're not good and I don't care, or okay, this is not the best approach, but let's try another approach. And there's a huge difference between those two, and also for a kid, for the mindset of a kid as well. So, and the problem is it's a bit of a paradox. Grades are somehow convenient. It's a measurement tool. It's easy to manage. It's easy to store. It's easy to transmit. And if you deal with a lot of people, if you deal with masses, it's justifiable. That's yeah, in a way. But on the other hand, it creates an environment that restricts innovation and restricts creativity. And at a certain point, they have lost their original purpose. They imply failure. They undermine personal relationships. And I think personal feedback is quite important. So instead of this previous approach towards education, more going into intensive coaching, into mentoring, solely to unlock actually the true potential of this kid, of this children, of this individual person. So where should we go then at the end? It's a good. We are in a very interesting time these days, because it's post-pandemic. So a lot of problems with education pop up very clearly, and certainly where kids are not the average student, which is still a big problem, certainly in Belgium. I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Belgium, if you're not the average student, then you're jumping out of the system in a certain way. So this pandemic, and at a certain point, highlighted the gaps and in education, and we need to rethink how schools, how education, how you can recreate that in a certain way where technology is used to service this new vision, where creativity can be used, where imagination can be used, where a future approach, an explorative approach can be used, rather than dictating everything, which is today's form of education. So the aims of whatever system that should be created should be, and in education, should be a very extensive way of critical thinking, a very specific way of production of knowledge, the development of the individual child, the individual person. What's their social identity that is important? How are we working on their self-creation in a certain way, without dictating everything for them? So we have to, and I read a quote in a newspaper recently that was, I think, one of our governance people has said, that we have to lead students into discovering new things. This is what an educating teacher should do. Leading students into discovering new things. So, providing spaces to discuss the different subjects and make creative ways, creative turnarounds. Learn them to listen to other voices. Learn them to tolerate criticism, to tolerate other people, and in general, let them think in a critical way, push them towards the direction of critical thinking in a certain way. As such, they will learn to develop new skills. They will learn how to handle certain problems, certain future problems, not specifically based on what happened before, but challenges that are not existing yet. They learn to respect other cultures. They learn to respect other nationalities. They will work on they will emphasize on cooperative learning. And in all different methods, in dialectic, critical, and even simple verbal methods, and it's very important, because I do notice and I notice it in we can make a lot of theories of what is new education, but at the end you have this specific child that is not really the average child and just jumping out of the ordinary, and who's completely lost in the current educational system, and it doesn't even have to be a gifted kid. It doesn't even have to be within a certain definition. If you're not average, it's not working, and it's a strange thing that I'm always surprised why it's not working, because I noticed that and this is then the more practical, my practical problem with the situation is that parents talk to children, talk to their educators. A lot of parents are critical thinkers and are trying to talk with the system, or trying to change the system in a certain way, and to my own frustration as well, when I talk to a teacher, when I talk to a member of the hierarchy in these educational systems, I always get the same argument. If I ask, okay, why are you doing this? Why are you working with grades? Why are you giving kids certain tokens if they do their best at school? Why are you doing this? Because we all know it's not working. And we all know it's not healthy for their mind, and we all know it's not doing anything into their individuation process, etc., etc. And the only argument I always hear is because it works, and it worked for 40 years already. And there's no way on how we can change these educators' mind in a certain way. They are so stuck in their thinking processes that it's as a parent. I'm talking as a parent now. As a parent, it's so difficult to change their minds in a way, and I have experiences with large schools, but also with very, very small schools with only 40 pupils in the whole school. And it doesn't change anything. It's always the problem of a system that seems to exist just because of the system, and not because of the kid, not because of the child. So, and this is something I think we can change, or we should change during this process. But I'm very curious on feedback on that one, because it's something that troubles me personally as well.